Hello everyone, welcome to MRI Knee Made Easy series. This series consists of multiple video tutorials explaining the anatomy and various knee pathologies in a simple manner. I will scroll through real cases and will try to make it as simple as possible for the residents to understand. So starting with the first in this series, this video addresses the basic protocol while imaging knee joint, followed by detailed description of the knee joint anatomy. Hope you will enjoy the video. So starting with the protocol. So while imaging knee joint, we should have a proton density fast spin echo fat saturated sequence in all three planes. As you can see here, this is proton density fast spin echo fat saturated sequence in sagittal plane. This is coronal plane and this is axial plane. So proton density fast spin echo fat saturated sequence is a fluid sensitive sequence. So it is very sensitive for the presence of effusion, tear, inflammation and marrow edema. So this sequence is a must while imaging not only knee joint but any of the joint in the body. Then comes the T2 weighted fast spin echo non-fat saturated sequence. This sequence is for reducing the excessive edema which is seen in proton density fast spin echo fat saturated sequence. So this decreases the excessive edema and the torn edges of the ligament they stand out clearly, and it is also important to obliterate the magic angle artifact which is seen with short TE sequences like T1 weighted sequence and proton density sequence. So T2 weighted sequence can avoid the magic angle artifact to some extent. Then we should have at least one sequence in the T1 weighted fast spin echo non-fat set. It is for visualization of the bone marrow and fractures. So good for seeing the marrow containing loose bodies present in the joint. So if we have a marrow containing loose body in the suprapatellar synovial recess or any part of the joint, it will stand out on this sequence. Then it is good to have a 3D GRE sequence because it can be reconstructed in multiple planes, and it is also very sensitive for the presence of hemosiderin contents within the joint and hemosiderin synovial lining that is seen in diffuse PVNS. It is less sensitive than proton density sequence for early cartilaginous lesion because cartilage is very hyper intense on this sequence, and so it is difficult to make the diagnosis of early cartilaginous lesions on this sequence. Whereas on proton density sequence, we can easily make out the cartilaginous lesion because here the cartilage is intermediate in signal intensity as compared to the fluid. Then this sequence, this GRE sequence is less sensitive for the presence of marrow edema, whereas the proton density sequence is very good for visualizing the marrow edema. Then GRE sequence can be used for better visualization of the cortical break and fracture line, and it is also good for seeing the loose bodies present within the joint. And if there is presence of calcification within the articular cartilage that is seen in chondrocalcinosis, it can be visualized on GRE. Then we can have one sagittal oblique sequence. This sagittal oblique sequence can be acquired in plane which is parallel to the wall of lateral femoral condyle. So this images the ACL along its long axis, and so we can make diagnosis of ACL tear better on these sequences. It is an optional sequence. It is not necessary that you should take this sequence in each and every patient you image. Now coming to the anatomy. First we should see the skeletal structures, all the skeletal structures present in the knee joint. So here we have lower end of femur which is articulating with the upper end of tibia. Then this is upper end of fibula which is articulating with the tibia, forming tibiofibular joint. Then we have patella, which is a sesamoid bone within the quadriceps tendon, and it is articulating with the femur, forming patellofemoral joint. Then this is coronal sequence, in which we can see lower end of femur articulating with the upper end of tibia, and we can also see the superior tibiofibular joint, and here we can see the patella. Then this is the axial sequence, in which we can see the patella articulating with the trochlear notch of femur. And this is the superior tibiofibular joint. Axial sequence is best for evaluation of the patellofemoral joint. Here we can see the nice congruency between the patella and the trochlea, and trochlea is having sufficient depth, and patella is articulating very nicely with the trochlea, and there is no evidence of any subluxation or dislocation of patella. And here we can see nice congruency between the femur and tibia, forming the knee joint. And at the same time, we should also have a look on the marrow pathologies like marrow edema or any other, and marrow infiltrative lesion. So if there is trauma, acute trauma, then we can have marrow edema, and this marrow edema stands out very nicely on the PD FATSAC sequence. Then we should look for the articular cartilage. So as I have already said that for articular cartilage, proton density fast spin echo sequence is the best sequence. So here we can see the intermediate signal intensity articular cartilage covering the femoral condyle and the tibial plateau. So we should visualize the articular cartilage along its complete extent from anterior to posterior. We should assess the articular cartilage of both the femoral condyle and both the tibial plateau. So this is medial femoral condyle articular cartilage, this is medial tibial plateau articular cartilage, and these are articular cartilage on the lateral side. Then coming to the trochlear cartilage. So the cartilage which is present anterior to the anterior horn of menisci is the trochlear cartilage. So for evaluation of trochlear cartilage, the sagittal sequence is the best sequence. So we can see trochlear articular cartilage here, very nicely seen. Then coming to the patellar articular cartilage, which is best visualized on the axial sequence. So here we can see the articular cartilage covering patella. Then while visualizing the articular cartilage, we should also have a look of the subchondral plate. So if there are cartilaginous lesions or cartilage fibrillation, erosion or defect, then we can see some kind of edema or cystic degeneration kind of changes in the subchondral bone plate. Then we should assess the shape of the patella. So there are 4 types of patella according to the Weibach pattern of classification. So if these are 2 facets of patella, medial and lateral facets. So if the lateral facet is equal to the medial facet, then it is Weibach type 1. If the lateral facet is longer than the medial facet, then it is Weibach type 2, which is the most common subtype. Then if the medial facet is distinctly small, then it is Weibach type 3. And if the medial facet is entirely absent or hyperplastic, then it is Weibach type 4. So we have 2 facets of the patella here, which are almost equal in size. So this is Weibach type 1 patella. Then we should have a look of the location of patella with respect to femur. For this, we have a ratio which is known as Insall-Salvati ratio, which is taken by measuring the length of the patella and the length of the patellar tendon and dividing the length of patella by the patellar tendon. And normally this ratio is 0.8 to 1.2. And if the patella is abnormally cranially situated, then it is patella alta. And if it is abnormally caudally dislocated or situated, then it is patella baya. So we have discussed about the skeletal structure, articular cartilage, so chondral plate, and types of patella. Now coming to the classification of the articular cartilage injury. So there are two classifications which are normally used for classifying the cartilage injuries. These are outer bridge classification and international classification of cartilage repair society. So you can discuss with your orthopedic surgeon which classification they usually follow, and you can report your cartilage injuries using any of these two classifications. Coming to the fat pad. So we have three fat pads here. First is the Hoffa fat pad, which is the infrapatellar fat pad. So it is very nicely seen in this patient. There is no edema or inflammation present in the Hoffa fat pad. And if there is acute trauma or synovial inflammation, inflammatory arthritis, or there is presence of any infection in the joint, this Hoffa fat pad will show heterogeneity and will appear hyperintense on the PD fat set sequence. So this is in infrapatellar or Hoffa fat pad. Then comes the suprapatellar fat pad. Here there is a suprapatellar fat pad, and then there is a prefemoral fat pad. So these two fat pads are separated by a synovial recess, which is suprapatellar synovial recess. In this patient, there is a physiological amount of joint fluid, so it is not very distended. And we can see this suprapatellar synovial recess separating the suprapatellar fat pad from the prefemoral fat pad. Coming to the synovial recess, so this is the suprapatellar synovial recess, which can be visualized in the sagittal plane as well as the coronal plane. So this is suprapatellar synovial recess. On axial plane, you can see. So this is suprapatellar synovial recess. This is prefemoral fat pad. Sorry, suprapatellar fat pad, and this is prefemoral fat pad. So if there is excessive amount of joint fluid, it will distend this suprapatellar synovial recess, and the joint fluid will also go into the adjoining patellofemoral recess. So there are two patellofemoral recesses, medial and lateral. This is the medial patellofemoral recess, and this is the lateral patellofemoral recess. These are not distended in this patient right now. So these are synovial recess. Then coming to bursa, we have many important bursas surrounding the knee joint. First is the prepatellar bursa, which is a potential space anterior to the patella. It is not distended in this patient, but if it is distended, it will appear as a hyperintense fluid collection anterior to the patella. Then this is the location for superficial infrapatellar bursa, and this is the location for deep infrapatellar bursa, which are not distended in this patient. So you can see all these anterior bursa on the axial plane also. So this is the location for prepatellar bursitis, and this is the location for superficial infrapatellar and deep infrapatellar bursitis. Then we have one important bursa in the posterior aspect of knee joint, that is semimembranosus medial head of gastrocnemius bursa. So this is the tendon of medial head of gastrocnemius. This is the tendon of semimembranosus tendon, and there is a potential space between these two tendons, and there is a potential bursa here. It is not distended in this patient, but if it is distended, it will give a very nice fluid distension, and there will be a pocket of fluid posterior to it. So if this bursa is distended, it is known as Baker's cyst. Then we have another important bursa, which is pes incident bursa, which is located here in the anteromedial aspect of tibia, adjacent to the pes incident tendons. Pes incident tendons are three tendons. These are sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus, and they insert over the anteromedial aspect of tibia. And to reduce the friction between these tendons and the tibia, there is a potential space which is pes incident bursa, and it is inflamed in many etiologies like rheumatoid arthritis or in osteoarthritis. So pes incident bursitis can be seen. Then coming to the synovial plica. So we have three important plica. First is the suprapatellar synovial plica. Here is the suprapatellar synovial plica. It is very thin, hypointense structure. It can be seen on the coronal as well as axial plane. So suprapatellar synovial plica can be of various types, like it can be a complete septum in which it separates the suprapatellar bursa from the rest of the joint cavity, and it can lead to isolated distension of the suprapatellar bursa, which can simulate a mass. So it can be a complete septum, or it can be there can be presence of perforations in it, or it can be incomplete septum also. So generally it is incomplete, and suprapatellar synovial recess generally freely communicates with the joint cavity. Then we have a medial plica. So this is medial plica, which is a shelf-like projection projecting into the medial patellofemoral joint. So this is medial plica, and on the sagittal sequence, this hypointense structure we can see. So this is medial plica. So medial plica can become thickened and inflamed, and it can lead to symptoms. It can lead to cartilage degeneration in the medial patellar facet and medial side of trochlea. Now coming to infrapatellar plica. So infrapatellar plica extends from anterior to the anterior cruciate ligament, and it goes superiorly towards the patella. So it is very thin in this patient. It is not very well visualized in this, but it can become thickened and inflamed in some patients. So this is the location for infrapatellar plica. And infrapatellar plica is consistently seen in maximum number of patients, and there is less variability with this plica. Then coming to the tendons. So we have multiple tendons surrounding knee joint and circling knee joint. So starting with the anterior compartment, we have quadriceps tendon. So this quadriceps tendon is appearing hypointense structure attaching over the superior aspect of patella. So quadriceps tendon is a multi-layered structure. So we have three layers in this. So the superficial layer is formed by rectus femoris. Then the middle layer is formed by the vastus lateralis and medialis, and the deep layer is formed by the vastus intermedius. So this is quadriceps tendon. So on axial sequence, we can see this quadriceps tendon is quite wide, and the pathology can affect a particular portion of the tendon. So it can affect only the partial thickness, or it can involve the partial width. So we can, we should evaluate the pathology in the quadriceps tendon by evaluating the complete width of the tendon and complete width of the tendon and complete thickness of the tendon. So this is quadriceps tendon. Then we have patellar tendon. Patellar tendon extends from the lower end of patella to the tibial tuberosity. It is also very hypointense structure, and similar to the quadriceps tendon, patellar tendon is also wide. So again, the pathology can affect a particular segment of the patellar tendon. So we should evaluate patellar tendon along its complete length, along its complete thickness, and along its complete width. So these are quadriceps tendon and patellar tendon. We can also see quadriceps and patellar tendon in the coronal plane. So this is quadriceps tendon, this is patella, and this is the insertion of quadriceps tendon and patellar tendon. Coming to the posterior sided tendon. So we have multiple tendons in the posterior part of knee joint. So starting with the medial side, we have medial head of gastrocnemius. This is the tendon of medial head of gastrocnemius. Tracing it proximally up to its insertion on the medial side of femur. So we can see this is medial head of gastrocnemius, which is getting its origin from the posteromedial tibial metaphysis, femoral metaphysis, sorry. Now seeing it in exsagittal plane, so this is medial head of gastrocnemius, which is taking its origin from the femur. Then comes the tendon of semimembranosus muscle. So this is the tendon of semimembranosus muscle, and it inserts over the posteromedial tibial plateau in a wide fan-shaped manner. So it is a very wide insertion, and it is in close proximity to the joint capsule and important stabilizing structures in the posteromedial corner. We can see this in sagittal plane. So this is the tendon of semimembranosus, and it gets its insertion over the posteromedial tibial plateau. So you can see this insertion, and this is the semimembranosus muscle. This is the semimembranosus tendon, and it is inserting here over the posteromedial tibial plateau. Then comes the pes anserine tendons, which are three tendons. So first is the tendon of semitendinosus, then there is gracilis and sartorius. So all three tendons, 1, 2 and 3. So these three tendons, they course anteriorly and they insert over the anteromedial aspect of tibia. So these are pes anserine tendons. So you can see here there are pes anserine tendons, and they are coming anteriorly here, and they are inserting over here tibia. So the medial collateral ligament is generally lie in very close proximity to the pes anserine tendons. So this is medial collateral ligament, and it is in close relationship with the pes anserine tendons. And this is also the site for pes anserine bursitis. Now coming to the lateral sided tendons. So we have lateral head of gastrocnemius. So this is lateral head of gastrocnemius, and it is getting its origin from the posterolateral femoral metaphysis. So here it is taking origin from. You can see that in sagittal plane. So this is the lateral head of gastrocnemius, which is taking its origin from the femur. On coronal plane, you can see this is the medial head of gastrocnemius, and this is the lateral head of gastrocnemius, and these are the origins of the lateral head and the medial head of gastrocnemius. So the origin of medial head lie at higher level than the origin of the lateral head of gastrocnemius. Then we have another important muscle on the lateral side, that is biceps femoris. It inserts over the head of fibula. So this is the head of fibula, and this is the tendon of biceps femoris. And this is the muscle belly of biceps femoris. tracing it downwards towards its insertion over the head of fibula along with the lateral collateral ligament. So it has a conjoined insertion over the head of fibula with the lateral collateral ligament. So here in the coronal plane, you can see very nice tendon insertion over the head of fibula. This is biceps femoris tendon, and it is having conjoined insertion with the lateral collateral ligament. So this is lateral collateral ligament, this is biceps femoris, and they form a shape of alphabet B. So you can see this is the lateral collateral ligament, this is the biceps femoris tendon, and they form shape of alphabet B. Then on sagittal sequence we can see this is the biceps femoris muscle getting its insertion over the head of fibula. Then comes another muscle, that is popliteus. So popliteus muscle forms the floor of the popliteal fossa and it lies deep to the popliteal neurovascular bundle. So this is popliteus muscle, and this hyperintense structure is the tendon, myotendinous junction of the popliteus tendon muscle. Then here is the popliteal tendon, and it is getting its origin from the popliteal notch of the femur. So here is the popliteal notch, and here is the tendon. So you can trace it. So this is the tendon and this is the popliteus muscle. On sagittal plane also we can see so this is the popliteus tendon. This is the popliteus tendon, and this is the popliteus muscle. So I have described about the anterior tendons and posterior tendons. Now coming to ligaments. So we have very important ligamentous structure in the knee joint, starting with the anterior cruciate ligament and posterior cruciate ligament. So this is the anterior cruciate ligament, which attaches on the anterior aspect of tibia, and it courses superiorly and posteriorly, and it attaches over the medial aspect of lateral femoral condyle. Then we have posterior cruciate ligament. So this is posterior cruciate ligament, which attaches over the posterior aspect of tibia, and it courses anteriorly and superiorly, and it attaches over the lateral aspect of medial femoral condyle. Again, in the coronal plane we can see. So this is posterior cruciate ligament, which is attaching over the posterior aspect of tibia and to the lateral aspect of medial femoral condyle. So this is the femoral attachment of the PCL. Then we have anterior cruciate ligament here, which attaches over the anterior aspect of tibia and here over the medial aspect of lateral femoral condyle. So this is the femoral attachment of ACL. Both ACL and PCL are composed of two bundles. So ACL is composed of anteromedial and posterolateral bundle, and PCL is composed of anterolateral and posteromedial bundles. So here we can see the two bundles quite separately seen in this coronal sequence. So these are two bundles of ACL. Similarly, we can see two bundles of PCL. On axial sequence, we can visualize ACL and PCL. So this is the tibial insertion of PCL. These are two bundles of PCL, and now this is the wide insertion or attachment over the medial femoral condyle. So this is posterior cruciate ligament. Then we have anterior cruciate ligament. So this is the femoral attachment of ACL. These are two bundles. And now it is forcing anteriorly over the anterior aspect of tibia. So these are anterior cruciate and posterior cruciate ligaments. So both these structures are quite hypointense on this sequence. There is subtle hyperintensity in the ACL. It is because of magic angle artifact. So these are anterior cruciate ligament and posterior cruciate ligament. Then we have meniscofemoral ligament. As the name indicates, one part of this ligament attaches with the menisci and the other end attaches with the femoral condyle. So meniscofemoral ligament, they attach over the posterior horn of lateral meniscus. So this is lateral meniscus. So one end attaches over the posterior horn of lateral meniscus, and it courses both the ligaments, the anterior and posterior meniscofemoral ligament. They course anterior and posterior to the posterior cruciate ligament, and they get their attachment over the medial femoral condyle, adjacent to the attachment of the PCL. And they are quite variably seen. They are not seen in all the patients, and in this patient also these structures are quite thin. So they are very thin in this. As we can see, a very small anterior meniscofemoral ligament and very small posterior meniscofemoral ligament. So the anterior one is known as ligament of Humphrey, and the posterior one is known as ligament of Brisberg. And these ligaments can also be visualized on the coronal plane and axial plane. Then from the medial collateral ligament. So this hypointense structure is the medial collateral ligament. It is a very long ligament, approximately 8 to 10 centimeter long. So this is the femoral attachment of MCL, and here is the tibial attachment of medial collateral ligament. And we can see medial collateral ligament in the axial plane also. So this is the medial collateral ligament. So here is the femoral attachment of medial collateral ligament. And here is the tibial attachment of medial collateral ligament. And tibial attachment of medial collateral ligament lie in close proximity to the pes inserine tendon. So this is the complete extent of medial collateral ligament, and it is hypointense structure. You can also see it in sagittal plane. So this hypointense structure is the medial collateral ligament. So medial collateral ligament is composed of 3 layers. First is the crural fascia. Then comes the superficial component of medial collateral ligament, which is this structure. Then comes the deep component of MCL. So deep component of medial collateral ligament consists of meniscofemoral and meniscotibial component. So a very thin structure here. So meniscofemoral ligament attaches with the menisci and the femur, and meniscotibial ligament attaches with the menisci and the tibia. So there are two components of the deep medial collateral ligament, the meniscofemoral and meniscotibial component. Then there is superficial component, and then there is crural fascia. So medial collateral ligament is composed of 3 layers. So this is medial collateral ligament. Then comes the another important structure on the medial side, that is medial patellofemoral ligament. So this hypointense structure, which is coursing from the patella to the femur, is the medial patellofemoral ligament. It is very important stabilizing structure for the patella, and if it is deficient, then patella will dislocate on the lateral side. So this hypointense structure is the medial patellofemoral ligament, and this medial patellofemoral ligament, it merges with the medial collateral ligament. So this structure, forms a sheath. Starting from anterior, there is medial patellofemoral ligament, then posteriorly it merges with the medial collateral ligament. Then comes the posterior oblique ligament. So posterior oblique ligament is a hypointense structure which starts immediately posterior to the medial collateral ligament. So this hypointense structure is the posterior oblique ligament, and it is formed by merging of the layer 2 and layer 3 of the medial collateral ligament. So this hypointense structure is the posterior oblique ligament, and as we course posteriorly, we can see this posterior oblique ligament, it merges with the oblique popliteal ligament. So we have posterior oblique ligament and then oblique popliteal ligament. So we have medial supporting structures. Starting from anterior, we have medial patellofemoral ligament, then we have medial collateral ligament, then there is posterior oblique ligament, and then there is oblique popliteal ligament. And this oblique popliteal ligament merges imperceptibly with the capsule of the knee joint, and it also lies in close proximity with the insertion of the tendon of semimembranosus. So this is the tendon of semimembranosus, and then there is oblique popliteal ligament, and this oblique popliteal ligament, it crosses to the lateral side as oblique popliteal ligament on the lateral side. So these are important stabilizing structure on the medial side. Now coming to lateral aspect. So on lateral aspect, we have iliotibial band. It inserts over the Gerdy's tubercle of tibia. So this hypointense structure is the iliotibial band. Now tracing it from inferior to superior, we have this iliotibial band. This iliotibial band is in close proximity with the lateral femoral condyle. So this is lateral femoral condyle, this is iliotibial band, and there is a thin interface between these two structures. So in persons involved in cycling, running, so they can have iliotibial band friction syndrome, in which there is inflammation and edema deep to the iliotibial band, and there is marrow edema in the lateral femoral condyle, and there can be presence of inflammation and fluid superficial to the iliotibial band as well as deep to the iliotibial band. Then this is the insertion point of the iliotibial band. We can see that in coronal plane. It is not very nicely seen here, but we can see that in sagittal plane also. Yeah. So here this is iliotibial band which is inserting over the Gerdy's tubercle of tibia. So this is an important structure on the lateral side. So this is iliotibial band. Now coming to other ligaments on the lateral side. So we have lateral collateral ligament or fibular collateral ligament. So this hypointense structure which is slightly wavy. So this is lateral collateral ligament. One of its end is attaching over femur and the other end is attaching over the fibula, and it forms a conjoint insertion with the tendon of biceps femoris. And both these structures, they attach over the lateral aspect of the head of fibula. So they don't insert over the styloid process of the fibula. They insert over the lateral side of the head of fibula. So we have other important structures that attach over the styloid process of fibula. and they are popliteofibular ligament, arcuate ligament, fabulofibular ligament. So these three ligaments, they attach over the styloid process of fibula. Coming to the lateral collateral ligament in the axial plane. So we can see this is lateral collateral ligament, and it is coursing inferiorly and it is attaching over the lateral aspect of head of fibula, and it is having a conjoined insertion with the biceps femoris tendon. So this is lateral collateral ligament. Then coming to popliteofibular ligament, as I told that popliteofibular ligament, it attaches over the styloid process of fibula. So this is popliteofibular ligament. This thin hypointense structure, and it arises from the popliteal tendon and it inserts over fibula. This very important stabilizing structure on the posterolateral aspect. This is popliteofibular ligament. So this is popliteal tendon on the coronal plane, and this is the popliteal tendon, and this is the popliteofibular ligament. Then we have arcuate ligament. Arcuate ligament has two limbs, medial and lateral, and arcuate ligament spreads over the myotendinous junction of popliteal tendon. So arcuate ligament spreads like this. So arcuate ligament is a very important stabilizing structure on the posterolateral aspect along with the popliteofibular ligament, and they can get injured with the ACL tear, and if they are not repaired and they are not identified with the initial MRI and they are not repaired along with the ACL, so it can lead to failure of the ACL graft. So reporting the posterolateral corner injury is very important along with the ACL tear. Then we have fabulofibular ligament, which is seen only when there is presence of fibula. So fibula is not present in this patient, so fabulofibular ligament will not be seen. And there is a reverse relationship between the fabulofibular ligament and the arcuate ligament. So if the fibula is present and fabulofibular ligament is prominent, then the arcuate ligament will be hypoplastic. And the reverse is also true, like if arcuate ligament is prominent, then fabulofibular ligament will be hypoplastic. So these are important structures, stabilizing structures on the lateral side. Now coming to menisci. So starting with the lateral meniscus. On the sagittal plane, we can see this is lateral meniscus. So lateral meniscus has equal sized anterior and posterior horn, and we can see this is body of lateral meniscus. These are anterior and posterior horn, and these are the root attachments of the lateral meniscus. This is the anterior root and this is the posterior root. So this is the lateral meniscus. You can see the lateral meniscus in the coronal plane also. So this is lateral meniscus. This is the root attachment, posterior root attachment of the lateral meniscus. And this is the anterior root attachment of the lateral meniscus. So this is anterior root, anterior horn. Then we have body of lateral meniscus. Then posterior horn and posterior root. Coming to medial meniscus. This is medial meniscus, in which the posterior horn is larger than the anterior horn, unlike a lateral meniscus in which anterior and posterior horn were of equal size, On medial side, the anterior horn is smaller than the posterior horn. So this is anterior horn, this is posterior horn. This is the body of medial meniscus. And this is the anterior root attachment of the medial meniscus. And here is the posterior root attachment of the medial meniscus. Coming to the coronal plane, we have, this is posterior horn, and this is the posterior root attachment of the medial meniscus. Then we have anterior root attachment of the medial meniscus. This is anterior root attachment. This is the body of medial meniscus. So these are menisci in sagittal and coronal plane. Now coming to axial plane. So these are menisci in the axial plane. This is the lateral meniscus, which is having a shape of a tight C. So it is smaller in size as compared to the medial meniscus, and medial meniscus is more like a semi-lunar shape, which has a wide posterior horn than the anterior one. And both the menisci, they appear hypointense on all the sequences. So if there is presence of hyperintensity in the menisci, it can be because of degeneration or tear. So this is lateral meniscus. This is the anterior root. This is the posterior root. This is the anterior horn. This is the body. This is the posterior horn. Similarly, we have anterior root, anterior horn, body, posterior horn, and posterior root of the medial meniscus. Then we can also divide menisci in different zones. The outermost is the zone 1, which is also known as red zone. So outer 1/3 of both the menisci are quite vascular, so they are known as red zone. So any tear in this zone will heal very rapidly as compared to the tear which are located in the inner aspect. So the outer 1/3 is the red zone, the middle 1/3 is the red-white zone, and the inner 1/3 is the white zone. So the inner 1/3 is very avascular, and this avascular zone, if there is tear in the inner 1/3, it is unlikely to heal on its own. So this zonal anatomy is present on both sides, on the medial and the lateral side. So we can assess the menisci in 3 zones. The outer 1/3 is the red, the middle 1/3 is the red-white, and the inner 1/3 is the white zone. Then talking about the mobility. So the lateral meniscus is the lateral meniscus lie in close proximity to the popliteal tendon, and popliteal tendon, it attaches with the popliteal tendon through the meniscal fascicles, which can be seen here. So this is the superior meniscal fascicle, this is the inferior meniscal fascicle, and they form a hiatus through which the popliteal tendon goes. So popliteal tendon, it lies in close proximity with the lateral meniscus, and it is responsible for the increased mobility of the lateral meniscus. And medial meniscus is quite immobile structure. It is not mobile as lateral meniscus, and so also it is more prone to trauma. So we can see this is popliteal tendon, and it lies in close proximity with the lateral meniscus. So I have described about the menisci on sagittal, coronal, and axial plane, and also about the different zones. Now coming to neurovascular structure. So starting with the axial plane, we have popliteal artery. This is the flowoid of the popliteal artery. This is the popliteal artery, hypointense circular structure. You can trace it from cranial to caudal. Then we have a small popliteal vein in this. Seeing that in coronal plane, we can see this is popliteal artery, this is popliteal vein. Popliteal artery lie deep to the popliteal vein. So this is popliteal artery and this is popliteal vein. So popliteal artery can be involved by various pathologies. It can be thrombosed, it can be involved in the entrapment by the anomalous muscular and tendinous structures. Then coming to the nerves, this is the tibial nerve which courses along with the popliteal artery and vein. So tracing it from superior to inferior. So this is tibial nerve. This is tibial nerve. It is having oval shape and fascicular pattern. It is intermediate in signal intensity. If it is hyperintense, we can say that it is involved by neuritis. Then this is common peroneal nerve. This is tibial nerve. This is common peroneal nerve. Both of them arise from sciatic nerve. Sciatic nerve is not sectioned in this patient. So it has already divided into tibial nerve and common peroneal nerve. And as we can trace this common peroneal nerve, it goes on the lateral side along with the tendon of biceps femoris, and it encircles the neck of fibula. So this is the common peroneal nerve coming cranially. This is common peroneal nerve. This is tibial nerve. So common peroneal nerve can be involved by various pathologies surrounding the fibula. It can be involved by fibular fracture, can be involved by the ganglion, or it can be compressed by any pathology surrounding the head of fibula, and it can lead to compression neuropathy and lead to foot drop. So these are important nerves. Then coming to we have some small veins. So this is the small saphenous vein. Then we have a great saphenous vein on the medial side. So I have described about the popliteal neurovascular bundle, tibial nerve, common peroneal nerve. Now coming to some of the normal variations. So talking about some of the common variations, so we have this patient. So you can see this lateral meniscus. So this is the lateral side of the knee joint. This is fibula. This is lateral meniscus. So do you find anything abnormal here? Yes, this lateral meniscus is discoid. So it is not having a typical morphology. So there is continuous bow tie. You can see. So it is having bow tie on multiple planes. So this is the first section, second section, third section, fourth section, fifth section, and it is having bow tie in all these sections. So this is the complete discoid meniscus, seeing that in coronal plane. So this is discoid lateral meniscus. This covering the entire tibial plateau. This is complete discoid meniscus. We can measure it. So it is 2.8 centimeter in width. So if it is more than 1.5 centimeter, it is discoid. Discoid meniscus are of three types: complete, incomplete, and Wisberg variant. So complete discoid meniscus covers the entire tibial plateau. Partial discoid meniscus cover the tibial plateau partially. Then there is Wisberg variant, in which there is lack of attachment of the lateral meniscus with the tibia, and it is hypermobile. So discoid meniscus are more common on the lateral side than the medial side, and this is the complete discoid meniscus. Discoid meniscus are also prone to trauma and degeneration, and it can be symptomatic. So this is discoid meniscus. Then we have another important anatomical variation here. This is the transverse meniscal ligament. So this hyperintense structure, it goes from anterior horn of one menisci to the anterior horn of another menisci. So this is anterior transverse meniscal ligament. You can see this in axial plane also. So this is transverse meniscal ligament. It courses from anterior horn of lateral menisci to the anterior horn of medial menisci. So this hyperintense structure is the transverse meniscal ligament. Then we can have oblique menisco-meniscal ligament, which courses from anterior horn of one menisci to the posterior horn of another menisci, and anterior horn of one menisci to the posterior horn of another menisci. So they can be medial or lateral. Oblique menisco-meniscal ligament, and oblique menisco-meniscal ligament can mimic bucket handle tear. So these are important anatomical variation, and they should be kept in mind while reporting knee MRI. So this discoid meniscus, transverse meniscal ligament, oblique menisco-meniscal ligament. Then we can have meniscal flounce. Meniscal flounce is nothing but a rippled morphology of the menisci, which is more common on the medial side. So meniscus can have a rippled appearance, which is completely normal, and there is no increased chances of any pathology in such menisci. So meniscal flounce is basically a rippled meniscus, and it is completely normal. Then we can have a small ossicle within the menisci. There can be presence of a small ossicle within the horn of menisci, which is common, which is not very common, and even if it is present, it is more common on the medial side within the posterior horn of medial meniscus. So there can be presence of a small ossicle within the posterior horn of medial meniscus. It can contain fatty marrow. So you should not confuse it with the loose body. So there can be presence of a meniscal ossicle. Then we can have fibula. So we can see here, this is fibula. This is the coronal plane of the same patient, and this is small sesamoid bone within the tendon of lateral head of gastrocnemius. This is fibula. and you should not confuse it with the loose body. So if fibula is present, we can see fibulofibular ligament. Then we can have meniscofemoral ligament, as I already described. Meniscofemoral ligament goes from menisci to the medial femoral condyle. So this is meniscofemoral ligament. This is lateral meniscus. Meniscofemoral ligament courses from lateral meniscus to the medial femoral condyle along with the PCL. So the anterior ligament is ligament of Humphrey and the posterior ligament is ligament of Brisbane. There are multiple other pathologies in this patient. I am not going into detail. So this is meniscofemoral ligament. It can be anterior or it can be posterior. Both can be present, or there can be absence of one or both of the ligament in normal patients. Then talking about magic angle artifact. So magic angle artifact is seen in tightly packed collagenous and tendinous structures when they have angle approximately 55 degree with the mean magnetic field. So this is magic angle artifact in the patellar tendon. This is magic angle artifact. There is abnormal hyperintensity in this. So this magic angle artifact is seen in sequences having short TE. So they are seen in proton density fast spin echo and T1 weighted fast spin echo, and they are not seen with the T2 weighted sequence because T2 weighted sequence have long TE. So we can see the magic angle artifact is seen in sequences having short TE, and we can add one T2 weighted sequence to obfuscate or to avoid the magic angle artifact. So in this video, I have described about the protocol and normal anatomy of the knee joint, and hope you have enjoyed the video. Thank you.